the standing awful title of this is The Tale of Laniel, Young Again. You all well know of Laniel, of all her stories, all her names, called Mother, called Young Again, called Laniel Laughing, Laniel Alone. You've heard the 100 tales of her, of those she hunted, those she helped, the blood she spilled, the gods she did defy, of how she held the world within her eye. But sit and listen, for I will sing a rarer song, the song that comes before, of when she had no name but one name, simple as a seed. Thus all of us begin, and thus she was, mere Laniel. Prologue, the whole story. That should be my autobiography. Once, years and miles away, there was a girl who loved a boy. That by itself was nothing new or unexpected. Laniel had known Tam since before she could braid her own hair. Early on, they played together. Later, when they were old enough to realize that they belonged to the endlessly warring tribes of boy and girl, she called him names, and he threw rotten apples at her. During one of the many truces that punctuated their endless war, they slipped outside the palisade and stripped naked in the relative privacy of a small hollow among the tall stone bluffs. It was there, sunlight filtering through the trees, that they compared their differences. As neither of them were yet 8 years old, they were forced to draw their own conclusions. Tam had an extra appendage, which was convenient as he could piss while standing. This he demonstrated, and Laniel was appropriately impressed. On the other hand, Tam confessed that his fruits were something of a liability when wrestling with the other children. In the end, they decided that Laniel seemed to have come off better in the deal, as she had no fruits and was taller than Tam by nearly half a hand. Years later, during another truce, they kissed. They had kissed before, of course, mothers and fathers and relatives as the occasion demanded. But they knew there were other kinds of kissing, kissing of the sort that happened in stories, kissing of the sort that happened in the civil house. So they kissed, and while it was interesting, they agreed that they couldn't see what all the fuss was about. Laniel suggested that they didn't know the proper way of it, and Tam agreed. Soon afterward, they decided that they couldn't stand the sight of one another. Sometime after that, they kissed again and found the experience much more to their liking. They lived deep in the endless ancient trees of southern Modag. Their town was called Whittle, and it rested in the western wilds of Lord Baranth's stead. It wasn't an important city like Kemcain or large. It wasn't any sort of city at all, really, hardly even a large town. In fact, there were only two things that kept Whittle from being a backward village with nothing to offer its lord but barley corn and leather. The first was their tall god. He was strong and tall and white and wise. The second thing was the Aryan River. The Aryan was too rocky and wild for boats or barges, but where it bent to brush the northern edge of town, it was strong and steady. It poured over the great wooden wheel that worked the bellows and gearage in the Rinnery. Further on, it turned 3 smaller wheels attached to the old stone mill. Spools of thread came to Whittle and were woven into sheets of silk. Coal and lime and bars of iron came into town and were transformed into ingots of steel. 3 times a year, Lord Baranth himself came through Whittle with gifts of cloth and wine and spice. He brought silver for their bells and salt to last them through the winter. When he left, he took silk and rin and flour and armor, leather and fur, as was his rightful due. He was pleased with this arrangement, and as he was generous with the salt and spoke courteously to their gods, his subjects liked him well enough. So the town flourished. There were lean years, but even the leanest of these was not so bad. And in the good years, the children were fat, and everyone had enough to share and lay a little bit aside. This was the town where Laniel and Tam grew up, nothing near a city, nothing like Caen to the north, or even Vishanti, but not a village either, and prosperous in its own way. Their civil house was not large or lavish, but it was 2 stories tall, all fitted stone. Their palisade was tall and topped with tar to keep the Teshin out. Their God was strong and wise, his branches reaching high into the sky. And when the bells rang, there were oil lamps that needed dousing, as well as reed lights and candles. Most folks hurried to shutter glass windows, too, and they wrapped silver mirrors with thick, dark cloth to keep them safe. Still, Whittle was small enough that when Laniel and Tam started courting, no one was terribly surprised. They married, and Laniel had 3 children, 1 boy, 1 girl, and one that would have been a boy if he had lived. Tam worked in the mill, Laniel spun silk and gardened and kept the house. And in time, their children walked and talked and played and grew until they thought that kissing was more than merely interesting. At this point, most folks' stories would be sliding toward a comfortable end, punctuated here and there with the soft sweetness of a grandchild or the bitter death of an old friend. For many people, that would be the whole story, and it would be a good story, too. But Laniel was different.